Everybody, it's Achilles Dust here with the Philosophy Society. We had a talk just now about some ideas, which I'm going to save as a different video for the Philosophy Society discussions. Now we're going to go through the Waking Life transcript. So this is going to be part 3 in our series discussing waking life. And so, yeah, so let's go through this. So we're on chapter 6. This one is free will and physics. And so this is the philosophy professor, David Sosa. And so it's a discussion about what he's saying. So, yeah, we can take turns. So did you want to start, David?
Sure. In a way, in our contemporary worldview, it's easy to think that science has come to take the place of God. But some philosophical problems remain as troubling as ever. Take the problem of free will. This problem has been around for a long time, since before Aristotle in 350 BC. St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, these guys all worry about how we can be free if God already knows in advance everything you are going to do. Nowadays, we know that the world operates according to some fundamental physics laws, and these laws govern the behavior of every object in the world. Now, these laws, because they are so trustworthy, they enable incredible technological achievements. But look at yourself. We're just physical systems too, right? We're just complex arrangements of carbon molecules. We are mostly water, and our behavior isn't going to be an exception to these basic physical laws. So it starts to look like whether it's God setting things up in advance and knowing everything you are going to do, or whether it's this basic physical laws governing everything. There's not a lot of room left for freedom. So now you might be tempted to just ignore the question, ignore the mystery of free will. Say, oh, well, it's just an historical
Anecdote.
It's a sophomoric, it's a question with no answer, just forget about it. But the question keeps staring you right in the face. You think about individuality, for example, who you are. Who you are is mostly a matter of the free choices that you make or take responsibility. You can only be held responsible. You can only be found guilty, or you can only be admired or respected for things you did of your own free will. So the question keeps coming back. And we don't really have a solution to it. It starts to look like all our decisions are really just a charade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Think about how it happens. There's some electrical activity in your brain. Your neurons fire. They send a signal down into your nervous system. It passes along down into your muscle fibers. They twitch. You might say, reach out your arm. It looks like it's a free action on your part. But every one of those, every part of that process is actually governed by physical law, chemical laws, electrical laws, and so on. So now it just looks like the Big Bang set up the initial conditions, and the whole rest of human history, and even before, is really just the playing out of a subatomic particles according to these basic fundamental physical laws. We think we're special. We think we have some kind of special dignity, but that now comes under threat. I mean, that's really challenged by this picture. Somebody help me? Read the rest.
Do you want to read the rest of it?
You're almost done. Go ahead.
Oh, almost done? Okay.
Unless you want someone else to switch.
It's just one paragraph. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. not the.
No, just this one in this piece.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you might be saying, well, wait a minute. What about quantum mechanics? I know enough contemporary physical theory to know it's not really like that. It's really a probabilistic theory. That's room. There's room. It's loose. It's not deterministic. And that's going to enable us to understand free will. But if you look at the details, it's not really going to help, because what happens is you have some very small quantum particles, and their behavior is apparently a bit random. They swerve. Their behavior is absurd in the sense that it's unpredictable, and we can't understand it based on anything that came before. It just does something out of the blue, according to a probabilistic framework. But is that going to help with freedom? I mean, should our freedom be just a matter of probability? just some random swirling in a chaotic system, that starts to seem like it's worse. I'd rather be a gear in a big deterministic physical machine than just some random swervings. So we can't just ignore the problem. We have to find room in our contemporary world will for persons with all that entails, not just bodies, but persons. That means trying to solve the problem of freedom, finding room for choice and responsibility, and trying to understand individuality.
Very good. Okay, so some of the ideas here, we get a review of like a little history of the idea of free will and the problem between God's omniscience and our free will, right? If God knows everything, then your path is determined. And so how are you free to choose things, right?
And how should I be responsible?
Yeah.
Because if I kill someone, if God knows and that maybe set me up to kill someone, then if the killing is not from my free will, then I shouldn't be responsible for that.
Yeah.
Someone I'm just like a robot, someone just somebody force me to do this. Everything has set up my fate, then I shouldn't be punished. Right?
So there's legal implications, right? And that's what you're identifying. And then, or social implications, we could say. And then there's just the conceptual understanding of there's this notion of what God is, this definition of God, and that analytically kind of doesn't really make sense with this conception of freedom. And what do we mean by free will at the same time? I think that we need to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, I think, to your point, it's the feeling that we have of agency, whether it actually exists or not. In reality, whatever that is, however we can prove it, I think that's less important than the feeling that we have that I can decide to say whatever I want to you. I think I raised this example a couple of sessions ago. I can decide to get up and leave. I can get up and decide to attack somebody. So I feel like I'm making those decisions. So you can't, if somebody says that we don't have free will, then you can appeal to that anytime somebody insults somebody. If I slap you in the face, anytime I do something, I could just appeal to the fact that I don't have free will. So I don't think it helps people operate in day-to-day life if they believe that. In fact, Sam Harris, you guys may know this, Sam Harris, about 7 years ago, he started moving away from the discussion of free will because people were taking his ideas and just acting irresponsibly and claiming that they didn't have free will. So if people just start believing that they don't have free will, even if it's true, they're going to start to behave in ways that are not in their own best interest. You're going to sit on the couch and eat Cheetos. Oh, whatever is meant to happen is meant to happen. It doesn't give you power.
That's a very good point. And I think that it's important to, and that's why we need to understand what free will really means, right? And this contrast to determinism. And in the moment, you have the capacity to make decisions. And a soft deterministic perspective is in the moments of deliberation. That's when you have your heightened freedom. You have your most freedom when you're contemplating and thinking about things. Because in the moment, sometimes I might work on habit, but I can think in advance and then prepare myself for that future moment, right? And that's the best. That's what I've been doing for the last 15 years, And I think that's a healthy use of thought. You reflect on the past, you identify, I believe this was the mistake, I'm not going to do this in the future. You exercise willpower sometimes, because you may have to resist. And so neurologically, your inhibitory neurons would be like holding back, I'm just going to just do a quick administrative thing here.
And the other, can I say something about that?
Yeah.
And the other piece about that is the associations that we're making to things that happened in the past. So if I figure out by reflection that some behaviors are associated with certain stories I'm telling myself or a certain narrative I'm telling myself, then I can identify that and break it. But if I'm not conscious of that, I'll keep acting out that story. Yeah. This is not just a Jungian thing. This is a human thing. I mean, he basically identified it through the shadow and through how we operate with these different mechanisms that he's identified. But it's not an original idea. It's a matter of fact. Where we have associations, those associations trigger more associations, and basically it kind of runs on a feedback cycle. And the less conscious we are of that feedback cycle, the more we're going to act out something that we believe is fate, because we just can't seem to change things. Just like the people who they get into the same relationships over and over, the same type of relationships over and over again. They keep running into people who seem to dislike them, and they're not sure why, and they think it's everybody else's problem. So it's being unaware of what's happening and how you're at the effect of of your world in a sense. You're co-creating, as David said earlier. You're
Yeah.
co-creating by your actions and how you're thinking and how you're behaving, how you're interacting with the world and other people. But you can only do that, to your point, if you're conscious about it, which means if you're reflecting and then thinking forward as far as what needs to be done.
Well, I want to be careful with the co-creating thing because I want to make it seem like I can just make shit appear.
No, that's not. Yeah, I think it's more of like a poetic expression in my
Sure.
interpretation. I don't know how David means it.
Yeah. Okay.
So I have a little issue, with this this logic, because we talk about, if I understand correctly, if people think that they don't have a free will, then there will be bad results for the society. People can just blame, they just I don't have free will, so I shouldn't be, doing things. But that if we use the result of no free will to prove the existence of free will, that's a logic. I think that's a
Begging the
logic.
question.
Yeah, it's like somebody say, oh, why God exists? Because when I believe in God, I feel great. God, greatest. I have a community. I have a place I can go on every Sunday. But no matter how good feeling or a result that you have when you believe in God, that doesn't prove the existence of God.
Yeah.
So if we apply for consequence to, and then backwards, use the consequence to prove, wouldn't that, whether God exists or not, whether free will exists or not, it should be independent from whatever consequence. That's the logic.
Yeah,
right?
for sure. Well, I think that it's almost like in the Sam Harris's point that you're making there, that when people believe in freedom, then they're more responsible and there's a better outcome for them. And it's almost like a healthy use of the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? It may not be true again, but what do we mean by freedom? I think there's multiple interpretations. One, you're free from coercion. Nobody made you do it, right? You were of sound mind, so that you had the capacity to make decisions, and then the decision was made. And I think when we look at like the landscape of properties, individuals are distinct. And when some individual engaged with their environment, we have to kind of like attribute causality to a specific person, and that's really what responsibility is. Or we can say blaming somebody. Well, did they do it? Yeah, whatever. But like, why does it matter?
But then with that logic, you just trace it all the way back to the Big Bang.
Yeah,
All of a sudden, we don't have
Well,
free
but
will.
it's
Exactly.
see, at that point it becomes a category mistake, right? When we change, when you look at the events of my decision-making capacity or my habit, it actually stops at me. So when he gives this, it's a slippery slope argument. When he gives this long causal chain, well, but it doesn't actually matter, that we live in a mechanistic universe in the sense that everything is fit together, like the universe is all together. And we're kind of trying to figure it out after the Big Bang. We're like, well, Daji, I'll get to your question in a sec. We're like, well, what, it doesn't really matter what led me to this point. It's the fact that I'm already here. And so one of the Hindu or Brahmanistic things would be like the guy that got bit by the snake, the poisonous snake or the poisonous arrow. And then the person's saying, hey, like, well, who shot me with the arrow? How big was the arrow? How far away was he? And the guy's like, no, man, none of these questions matter. What matters is getting the poison out of you. You're focused on the wrong information, right?
Agreed. Totally agreed. Which is the point that we were just making a few minutes ago, which is that free will, whether it exists or not, is less relevant than the fact that we feel like we have agency, so we have to do something with it.
Yeah.
Right? Because if we believe that it's not there, the poison isn't there, then you're just going to start philosophizing and asking questions about things and where they came from and what things mean. Whereas your life sucks, you got to do something about
Sure.
it, so fix it. You know what I'm saying?
I think we need to separate those things out, but they're both something we can actually talk about.
Right.
It's not like a contradictory thing. Okay, just one sec. Daji, you want to jump in there?
Hey, Achilles, how are you doing, man?
I'm well. On yourself?
I'm doing good. I just wanted to ask you a brief question on a minor point you made. That when you join a religion, you're of sound mind and everything. I just had a random thought I wanted to ask you. Can it
Just
be
one sec. Just one sec.
Okay.
Keep on talking. Keep on talking. I'm not listening.
Yeah. Anybody there? I would like an answer. Do you think most people that are religious were of sound mind when they joined, or was it truly a kind of a fair way of joining the religion that they joined? To an extent that can we actually blame them for being religious? Keeping in mind that most people become religious as children.
Okay, sorry. So I'm just gonna. So can you just give me a quick one statement summary? I had to just leave the room. That's all.
Oh, okay. So basically, what I asked was, can it be truly said that most people actually joined the religions freely, and that they were of sound mind when they joined? Because most people joined the religion when they were kids. So can we really actually, if you're someone that actually hates religious people, can you actually hate a majority of people for being religious? Because most of them joined unfairly.
Yeah, like
Do you think so?
I would always take the position that I don't hate the people, I hate what they believe. Right? It's not the people that's the problem. And we all are confused sometimes. And to say hate, like it's like, you know, we can unpack that, but that's part of the problem with indoctrination. And the reason that like religion as a social organism, it predominantly functions that way. Most religious groups, like just the way that there's no question and answer discussion for like I come from a Catholic background. So as the priest is speaking at the front of the room, no one's really allowed to say anything. You just got to kind of listen and accept that interpretation. And so, and in the Catholic view, like the clergy are the ones that have the right to interpret the text, and you're supposed to just accept their authority. And so, you know, there's that. And then I gave the example of the Hutterites, you know, excommunicating people that don't agree with their practices or their beliefs. And then Laith brought up this point earlier about the religious community where like, just don't ask. That's for the religious people to figure out. You just live a good life and just work, you know? And so that's, again, like, I would agree with the argument that the current social mechanism of religion takes away people's freedom in the sense that it's just like advertising, like engaging your biases and making you like a specific thing just because of being familiar with it, right? And so like the mirror exposure effect, just being exposed to things, you increase your liking for that thing. So
what's the border between a religion and a cult? Is a religion just a very successful cult?
There are certain properties. One big difference is in a cult, it would be a human being that is the leader and analogous to worship. Whereas in religions, it is a god that is the object of worship, and the medium to fulfill those properties of worship would be through some religious expert, like a priest or a pastor or whatever.
Jesus Christ and his disciples?
Those also would be another medium, but they're like, Jesus is like a demigod. He's like depending on the religious group.
He's identified with God. Like if you want to go with the Christian.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
There's different interpretations.
No. Every single Christian will tell you Jesus is God.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm just saying what the text says and what the say of every denomination that Jesus is God.
Okay. I think they're. Yeah. Okay. I hear your statement.
Can I ask you a question that you just previously say? You say, don't ask the, why I get that snake bite. Just do something with that.
Yeah.
But this example also still recognize there's no freedom, because when you say, "Oh, my life sucks, I got to do something about it," then you already believe that whatever you do,
1 sec, Laith,
is a reason for things getting better in the future. So you already recognize there's a causality relation there. And when you have a causality relation there, then there's no freedom. Because
I don't know if that's true.
I'll give you an example,
1 second.
because freedom means you have a choice to be different. For example, if it's raining, the land will get wet, right? The land doesn't have any choice. When it's raining, it will not be wet. It will not be, wet. If it's rain, it will happen because it's causality. Once you have causality, you have a reason and cause a result, then you don't have freedom. Because that freedom means you don't. If there's a reason If the reason will control you, the reason will control because the reason is who caused the result. Freedom means I don't need, I'm free. It means I'm not contained.
Independent of any
independent
force.
of any forces.
Yeah.
So
I get
that's the thing, whenever there's a causality, that's why it's, here says, because there's a fundamental, if God creates everything, God is the reason, then there's no freedom because we are not independent of any forces.
Okay, let's pause it there. So you want to respond?
Yeah. So
One sec, let's just let
it's
Laith-
a question, just a quick question.
Okay, yeah.
So would you think that it's more empowering? So it gives you more ability, gives you more confidence for you to take that chain of causality and say, okay, now I can be at the cause of some effect. Say, for example, I want to change
Sure.
my life in a specific way.
Yeah.
Do you think it would help you as a human?
Yeah, it will help me.
Yeah. So do you think then maybe taking that line of approach is more intelligent than, say, for example, the average person saying, I don't have freedom, things are going to happen how they happen, I'm a
for sure.
victim.
Right.
Right.
But philosophically, logically, that doesn't prove
But
that the free will exists.
so
One sec, let's come back to that. We have to define freedom. That's the problem here.
Yeah.
right,
Okay.
just like practical philosophy, that's all I'm getting.
It's okay. You're great. You're great.
Yeah.
Okay, Laith, go really quick. Let's see what's up.
Practical.
This is
Yeah,
Jarrell.
I'm just say like you cannot believe without any care, you cannot continue with the life without any care also, the Jesus when he's come in the land, he's take a hand, give a hand to growing up, and he's got the people to follow him and follow him words, and he's back to the God because he's know what exactly he's gonna do. Depends that the human what he's believed, sir. So when you see the truth things, you can't believe it. The life is continue what depends you believe. That is. Thank you, sir.
All right, let's take the ship to the next level. So I think part of the problem is freedom. When we talk about freedom as in matter, is this particle free from everything else, right? Free of force, free of constraint, free of coercion. Really what we're trying to talk about freedom is agency and choice, right? I think that's a healthier domain. And the fact that your choice does impact itself and can lead to positive outcomes. So it does empower your control and your self-direction in life. And really it's part of this, the term freedom, its usefulness is in responsibility, right? Which is empowering for you. You want to be responsible. You want to have that capacity to and even Stephen Covey, the very first thing we talk about is basically freedom, right? The power to choose between your response and not be reactive. So that's embedded in that. And Covey is not a determinist, right? In the second chapter, Inside Out, he argues 3 positions against determinism.
So let me ask you, you talk about, so you mentioned, if we believe in free will, because I want to, it makes me, but why do you want to? Why do you want to be powerful? Why do you want to control your life?
Because I think you're just going to have a better life. Like when we
Why
talk,
do you want to have a better life?
so as a human being, he loves this, it's great. It's good though. As a human being, there's
suffering.
there's a difference in quality of your experience, right? And to optimize the quality of your experience and the life you lived, we would say that's analogous to a good life. And so having control is the ability to navigate your experiences to some degree, right?
But why? But why do you want to, I know the control will give you that result, whatever word you use, good life,
Sure.
whatever.
Yep.
But it's you. Why do you want a good life?
Can I answer your question with a question?
Mhm.
How does suffering feel to you? How does loneliness feel? Despair? How does that feel? How does suicidal feel to you? And how about joy? How does that feel? How about love?
Well, I feel bad,
Yeah, you feel bad, and love feels good, right?
but
Joy.
but I don't know why I feel bad.
That's okay. Do you want to feel bad? Do you want to feel?
I
Do you
don't
want to
want to feel
suffer?
bad.
You don't want pain, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want love,
Mm-hmm.
right? You want joy.
Right.
You want success for your family.
Yeah.
You want them to feel
Yeah.
safe.
Okay. But using that same philosophy, you are basically saying, because the religion people can persuade you in that way. Once you believe in God,
See,
you'll feel great.
It's good.
You feel wonderful. So you should believe in God. But the whole philosophy, about this religion is that God really exists, independent of the result? Because you're trying to say if there's a good result, if I don't want to feel bad, you should believe in free will. That's applied to consequence. If we use the same logic, then the religion can also use this to believe God exists, which you disagree.
I do.
But given our certain state, our state of scientific knowledge, we know it's going to change in 500 years. So even though the things that we're certain of now will change later.
Mhm.
So what I'm trying to say with that statement is, like Leif said with belief, is that if you believe something that actually helps you, that serves you, that's good for other people, that's good for yourself, even if it's not 100% true, even if it's not accurate, that frame, it's better to take that frame than a frame that is 100% true, even if that frame is 50% true. It's better to take that frame than a frame that is 100% true, that doesn't lead you down a life of love and joy and contribution and being able to alleviate suffering.
Sure. But that's not a scientific approach. When we in mathematics, when we dig out the truth, the scientists don't say, oh, if we come up with this conclusion, then we will have a good result. No, the economics, we just stick to the facts. 1 + 1 = 2. Doesn't matter if 2 is good for me or bad for me. That's a scientific objective truth. It's independent of whether I believe it or not. Because a lot of the dictators will try to tell us, oh, this is great. Hitler said, this is great. If you believe in me, it will have great consequence. But that, if there's a logic fallacy here. Because otherwise we won't be, people won't talk about, there's a evolution. Evolution is against the religious belief, right? We try to talk about this, whether God exists, independent of the good feeling, whether you believe it or not. It's two different things.
Okay, let's pause on that. Daji, you want to say something? Go ahead, buddy.
Hey, yeah, I just want to quickly comment on the question, why do we want to be happy? Just very quickly, I don't think we truly want to be happy. I don't think happiness is an objective thing that exists. It's just something the brain simulates. It's like a brain candy to promote certain actions and then to demote other actions, behaviors. It just kind of shapes how human beings act. And since we contribute not only to ourselves, but to a greater system of multiple human beings, we kind of form a super organism. I think it's a way that the super organism survives by our drive to want to be happy. So I don't think it's more of this is a good thing to pursue a good life is a good thing. I think it's more of individuals pursuing a good life entails actions that entail survival for the greater entity, for the collective entity. So I kind of believe we don't want to be happy because it is good. I think we want to be happy because we're programmed to be that way by nature.
Yeah, I think it's both, really. I think it's intrinsic and extrinsic. But let's just shift gears here. Okay, we're going to go to the next. All these points, you guys will bring them up. Don't worry. Unless your burning desire right now, David. If you have a burning desire, vote.
Well, I just want to say, actually, I'm quoting Kant again.
Oh yeah, that's good.
Kant has an answer for this.
The wizard's tower of philosophy.
Yeah.
Summoning a wizard here, bud.
So he has an example. For example, I stand up. This is actually in the first critiques.
Here, you want to go in the video and stand up? Here, go ahead.
I stand up. That's right.
David's standing up.
I standing up. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm standing up. So, if a scientific, if you put the sensor, all scientific, method, they could actually measure, how my blood pressure change, whatever, so it shows there's a causality here, so whenever there's a causality, there's no free will, because free will means, independent. So if the science can explain everything, science is based on causality, right? So science is logic, whatever. You have to, you do this test, the water, 0 degree, 0 degree, you're frozen. Everything has causality. Has a reason.
Quantum mechanics, is that
right? Mechanics,
science?
yeah. So I stand up.
Like
You put a sensor. You can tell exactly, where my the change of my blood pressure come from, right? But there's only one thing science cannot explain. Why I stand up? I just stand up. So there's two different things. the free will doesn't belong to the area that science, research on. Science is all about our experiences, but science cannot touch the free will, the dignity, the bravery, all these things. These things are this is belong to things in themselves.
Sure.
Yeah. So there's two different worlds. One world is controlled by causality, and that's the science world. That's the experiences world. That we cannot. There's no freedom. But because there's causality, applies. You can, if they say God created a human being, that's not who creates God. You can keep asking. The Big Bang. But that's not the whole world. There's another world called things in themselves. You can explain better than me. So all those things, the freedom actually come from that world. Like I stand up, I just stand up.
Yeah,
that's a free will.
It might just be an epistemological thing, though. It's just that because we can't know the thing in itself, we can't know. Like freedom exists. It's a noumena. We can't know it. We never have access to it. In that way.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
basically, one last word. Yeah, exactly. So in the first critiques,
Pure reason.
pure reason, Kant actually say we at least we keep the possibility of freedom, and in the moral in the second one, he actually proved that the freedom exists because of the morality. Because
I know, but let's not go there right now.
That's
So let's take the ship. Let's take the ship. So we're gonna who wants to read this one? Constantine, you want to read this one?
Yeah, Alex Jones. I'll be Alex Jones. All right. You can't fight City Hall, death and taxes. Don't talk about politics or religion. This is all equivalent of enemy propaganda rolling across the picket line. Lay down, GI, lay down. We saw it all through the 20th century. And now in the 21st century, it's time to stand up and realize that we should not allow ourselves to be crammed into this rat maze. We should not submit to dehumanization. I don't know about you, but I'm concerned with what's happening in this world. I'm concerned with the structure. I'm concerned with the systems of control, those that control my life and those who seek to control it even more. I want freedom. That's what I want. And that's what you should want. It's up to each and every one of us to turn loose and show them the greed, the hatred, the envy, and yes, the insecurities, because that is a central mode of control. It makes us feel pathetic, small, so we'll willingly give up our sovereignty, our liberty, our destiny. We have got to realize that we're being conditioned on a mass scale. Start challenging this corporate slave state. The 21st century is going to be a new century, not the century of slavery, not the century of lies and issues of no significance and classism, statism, and all the rest of the modes of control. It's going to be the age of humankind standing up for something pure and something right. What a bunch of garbage. Liberal, Democrat, conservative, Republican. It's all there to control you. Two sides of the same coin. Two management teams bidding for control. The CEO, a job of slavery, incorporated. The truth is out there in front of you, but they lay this out. They lay out this buffet of lies. I'm sick of it, and I'm not going to take a bite out of it. You got me? Resistance is not futile. We're going to win this thing. Humankind is too good. We're not a bunch of underachievers. We're going to stand up and we're going to be human beings. We're going to get fired up about real things, things that matter. Creativity and a dynamic human spirit that refuses to submit. Well, that's it. That's all I got to say. It's in your court.
Let's go to the street.
Okay, so just to put the elephant out there, so Alex Jones had a serious, 10-year-long, debacle from the Sandy Hook shooting, which was a school, and a bunch of kids got killed and teachers and stuff like that. And he basically just said it was a hoax with no evidence, and then made a bunch of money, and then got sued in court, and then lost all that money off of this because of the suffering of those families. And so, okay, so aside from that, I'm not canceling the guy. I'm just saying, and this happened, and there's some problems there. What he said here, I like what he's saying here. He's got a lot of energy in the movie, and he's defining free will in a similar way that I am, free of coercion. But it's not just direct coercion where you're like forcing someone to do something. It's a socialized form of coercion, right? In the way that the structure of our society is, in its capitalistic, democratic society. And so,
Can I ask a meta question to you? Why did you introduce Alex Jones in that way?
Yeah.
When you didn't have to, right?
I think
you
that-
basically framed,
Yeah.
and I'm not trying to, you
No,
framed everybody's perception negatively because of who Alex Jones is outside of this text. Because remember what you were saying last time, let's
Yeah,
focus on
yeah,
the text.
Yeah. I think that in some instances, like if we were talking about something, like if you were going to read lyrics of Kanye West,
Uh-huh.
you know, or
But all of these people are individuals, Akuli.
yeah.
liberal
I just
or-
think it's important to, when something like that happens, instead of just canceling the person, because
Yeah.
cancel culture is, and I've talked about cancel culture.
Yeah.
You could just check it. It's on the thing.
Mhm.
It's better just to do an account of some things that are poor, and because I think that cancel culture is trying to seek some justice in some ways. It's just done poorly because they will ignore what the person said. We read what he said, right? But I think that it is important to say that, because I don't want to make it look like, I don't want to condone the previous thing that he did. I don't want to make it look like, because I agree with what he's saying here, that I also agree with what he's done there. And I do not agree. And so I need to make that explicit. But then say what he said here, I said, I do agree with this.
Right.
They are independent, but I think that because people will associate an individual with all of the things that they do, it's important just to clarify so that I'm not perceived as condoning that other behavior.
Fair.
So that's why I'm doing that.
Okay.
And I hear what you're saying though, because it may
that's
be
fair.
unfair to him.
Yeah.
Because I'm talking about a different thing that was said or done
No.
that's irrelevant than this.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
But I think we just need to be explicit, you know,
Sure.
because the alternative would be just the cancel culture thing. And I don't really agree with that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Cool.
So yeah. So I think this form of freedom is just looking at a socio-political critique and what freedom we have in a larger social context than from a causal mechanism context,
Mhm.
right? Of particles and being matter or whatever.
So you like what he said?
I love that. Look at the end, right? Creativity, the things that matter, creativity and the dynamic human spirit that refuses to submit, right? That's empowering. Where no matter what is happening, you do have a spirit, you do have power, you do
Yeah.
have agency,
Yes.
right? That refuses to submit.
Very good. Okay, let's go to the next one. So Otto Hoffman was this guy. The question is to be liberated from the negative, which is really our own will to nothingness. And once having said yes to that instant, the affirmation is contagious. It bursts into a chain of affirmations that knows no limit. To say yes to one instant is to say yes to all of existence. So this again is very Sartrean. There's a lot of that in here. And you know,
Existentialism?
and the nothingness, right? Like that term comes from the title of his book, you know?
Okay.
And so consciousness knows what it is because it's through negation. It is not that thing, right? And this affirmation point, you know, like, I think it's just like, this is more of a psychological discussion here. Like when I think it's really just when you become aware of your existence and your capacity for agency, then you can take that same approach and apply it to all of your experiences. And so that's why it says it's contagious. And there is something to be said about decision making and how it builds on itself. When I have a certain mode of how I make a decision and then I keep on applying it, it's harder to disengage from that mode after I've done 10 trials because I'm getting like a practice in doing it, you know?
I have a question about that first sentence though.
Yep.
The quest is to be liberated from the negative, which is really our own will to nothingness.
Mhm.
Is he trying to say that we return to the origin? What is he saying? What do you think he's saying with that first sentence there?
Well, liberated from the negative, and yeah, again, it might be a specific Sartrean thing, so I'm going to have to interpret it with what I know, and I haven't read enough Sartre to screen that out, or know enough about Otto Hoffman to say really what he's saying. But from the negative, the way it's being used there, almost an emotional thing. I'm thinking from that, and in contrast to negation, because you could say the quest is to be liberated from negation, but from the negative is what, you know? I feel that the use of that phrase is kind of pointing towards an emotional disposition. So feeling bad, feeling upset, and which is really our own will to nothingness. And the will to nothingness, we could talk about nihilism in some ways, the belief in nothing or no value. And the way that I utilize this is the identification with nothing can be a move away from those negative states, those negative identities, right? But when you just identify with just the process of being conscious, it is a nothingness because it's conscious of whatever, right? And so you see consciousness as like the cup
Mhm.
You could put whatever you want in there. You could put negative shit in there, or you could just recognize that the capacity as a container
Mm.
is the thing, right?
Interesting.
And then what that does
Mm.
is the nothingness is that the cup doesn't have to be full. And so the Tao Te Ching talks about this as well. The
Mm.
uncarved block. The mind is like the uncarved block. You
Mm.
can form the block into whatever you want,
Mhm.
right?
So maybe saying yes to all of existence also allows you through this empty vessel that you're becoming to like receive information.
Yeah.
or-
Yeah, like and that's the elimination of biases.
Uh-huh.
And so that could be the capacity of increasing one's freedom.
Right.
Right. And the thing that allows you to have freedom, if it would be anything, it's the mind.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's cool.
All right. Next. Did you want to read this one? Who wants to read this one?
I just went. So
David? Or Terrell, I guess you're like, this is your first round here. You want to read? No.
Where do you want me to?
Right here.
I was not paying attention. Oh, the main character?
Yeah.
The main character is what I call the mind. Its mystery, its capacity to represent. Sorry, I'm nervous.
Okay. You're doing great.
Throughout history, attempts have been made to contain those experiences which happen at the end of the living, where the mind is vulnerable. But I think we are in a very significant moment in history. Those moments, what you might call
Liminal
liminal,
Yep.
limit, frontier. Gosh, sorry guys.
It's
sorry,
okay.
guys.
It's okay. Doing great.
Edge zone experiences are actually now becoming the norm. These multiplicities and distinctions and differences that have given great difficulty to the old mind are actually through entering into their very essence, tasting and feeling their uniqueness. One might make a breakthrough to that common something that holds them together. You know, going?
Yep.
And so the main character is to this new mind, greater mind, a mind that yet is to be. And when we are obviously entered into that mode, you can see a radical subjectivity.
Mhm.
What is that radical again?
Yeah.
Radical attunement
Yeah.
to individuality, uniqueness to that which the mind is, opens itself to a vast objectivity. So the story is the story of the cosmos now. The moment is not just a passing empty nothing yet. And this is the way in which these secret passages happen. Yes, it's empty with such fullness that the great moment, the great life of the universe is pulsating in it. And each one, each subject, each place, and
Each object.
each object, each place, each act leaves a mark. And that story is singular. But in fact, it's story after story.
Very good.
Sorry, guys, I'm really nervous. I wasn't expecting
That
to
was
read.
good.
That was awesome.
Very good. Yeah.
So, okay, so so again, we can actually start to see the structure of the overall argument of the film, right? So he's bringing up the point of free will. He's talking about, in our previous one, sorry, just check this here. Yeah, like the capacity of consciousness and nothingness and existence. And then we go into, and then I said the mind, and that's the next thing that they go through here, right? And this almost makes me think of Hegel a little bit. The story is singular. It's the story after story. It's just human, is what it is,
Mhm.
right? And being human is one with a mind,
Mhm.
you know, in a certain capacity. Like AI may have a mind, but it'll be different than our mind, you know, or we may find another organism that has a mind and it's different than our mind,
Mhm.
right? We have individual minds. We're not a hive mind.
Mhm.
And that's also another critique towards the free will thing, is that you have individuality, you know, but there is some social influence. There is a social force, and we can see that like with groupthink as a bias, right?
Mhm.
Or conformity. So yeah, I think that the main character, the mind, its mastery, right? Its capacity to represent. The mastery and representation are two different things for sure. Self-mastery through self-awareness and this directiveness, right? I'm navigating myself is a thing that's part of the mastery. Representation, that's a whole PhD in the philosophy of mind, right? There are just books that you could write and have been written on that. And then this is an interesting experiences at the end of the limit where the mind is vulnerable. And so that goes back to the refraction point. What knowledge can we have? We can have experiences and thoughts, but to formulate it into knowledge, there's going to be some philosophizing or sciencey stuff. Be a little bit of a scientist, be a philosopher, figure out what it is that you're experiencing. And I would say that the philosopher's role is to be at the edge and to experience the thing and then to utilize their capacity for language to represent it to another in such a way that it makes sense to them. Right? So if you experience God, that's great, but I'll never be able to know what your experience is. And to be philosophical would be able to use words to transfer some information to me that is useful to me.
Yes.
But it can't be contingent on you.
Yes.
Right? You can't go in my brain and turn the light on and I'm like, I can see. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't work like that, you know?
Right. And what is your sense about having experiences that can seem to be contained by language? Which means we can we can do our best.
Sure.
We can do our best, but there's something there that just isn't captured by language.
And that's we call that qualia,
Right.
certain data.
Right.
And it's just know the limit.
Yeah.
Right? The glass is there. It separates the rooms
Mhm.
or whatever, right? There is a boundary to knowledge and to language. And it's okay to be there. And our feelings and emotions can be evoked to you know, illuminate that we're in those places. But don't be scared of those places. You know, it's part of our existence in some ways, you know? And to be wise, to be able to communicate what that is. Like I see it almost like the old warrior comes back to the village and then the young people are there, and the old warrior's role in some ways is to just tell them what's out there without scaring them so they don't go, you know, like it's its own thing, right?
And I don't want to fall into this trap either that I was talking about with free will, which is that if I,
Hey, Samuel.
and I'm speaking to myself right now, which is that if I say that there are certain experiences that can be captured in language, I might be influencing myself to not try to put them into language, which is a problem because
Yeah.
I can't communicate with those experiences to other people, and also I can't properly communicate those experiences to myself, so I can think about them in a specific way
Yeah.
that allows me to help myself.
Yeah, that's why like I have this psychological approach. Like I take philosophy and psychology and I combine them together to because it makes sense to use those modes.
That's great.
And then that's part of why you need to educate yourself. You can come here, you can take courses, and it'll help you understand those things.
Yeah.
And the other one too is like you can do psychedelics to engage in these experiences as well, or just put yourself in crazy situations that you're not familiar with, and then you will grow. Like my behavioral psychology professor, behaviorist, he said an organism will only change when its environment changes. And so to perpetuate my growth,
That's great. I love
I've
it.
thrown myself in situations that are completely like being in university.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not good at this, but I'm going to suffer and then I will grow from that.
Yeah,
you
the only
know?
way to become good, go there. You can't
Yeah.
be good and then go there. You're going to be good by going there.
It could be both.
It could be both, right? But
Even if you're not good, you can still become good. Let's just,
sure,
Aristotle would disagree, but let's just let's be human as psychologists here, you know?
right.
Bring in some Maslow or some Rogers. Okay, Daji, go.
Sorry, it's gonna be a detour question, but you brought up psychedelics, and I wanted to ask you about DMT. I've never used DMT myself, but I've been researching it, and I've heard a lot of people when they take it, they experience these otherworldly entities. Not like just the otherworldly dimension they go into, but just like they meet these, they call them dimensional elves or something, or there's a different name for them. What the hell is going on? Why does everyone meet an entity that talks to them in a foreign language?
Well, okay, so let's just, I don't know about everybody. There are some subjective reports. I don't really have, we could do some research right now. I'm not sure which studies have been done on people that are taking DMT. but there are some really interesting experiences that people have. Just like Constantine brought up, they may not necessarily have the philosophical language to express it in a way that makes sense. But at the same time, if we haven't done it, we haven't experienced it, we really, we don't know that much. I'm not going to tell you to do DMT, but it is a thing that you can explore if you wish to explore it.
What's
Like
the full name of DMT?
it's like dimethylamine or something like that. I don't know. I can look it up. A second here.
Just quickly check. Is it legal in Canada or?
No, it's not.
Something
Oh.
It's N-dimethyltryptamine. Yeah,
dimethyltryptamine.
it occurs in many plants and animals, including humans. It's a derivative and a structural analog of tryptamine. It's used as a psychedelic drug prepared by various cultures for ritual purposes as an ethnogen. So yeah, it lasts about 10 minutes or so when you smoke it. But yeah, it's based on the 5-H serotonin receptor. Yeah, so I am pro psychedelic. They're non-addictive, physiologically or psychologically, and I think it can be used. I think it's part of our evolutionary history, and it can be used in a healthy way to increase our well-being. I know it's blasphemous, but it's almost like the Eucharist. Throw that out there. Okay, so let's look at what else we got here. Significant moment in history, and so the liminal, the frontier, edge zone experiences. I don't know if that's necessarily true. Like, I think that humans always have these experiences going on. So these experiences are becoming the norm. So maybe, sure, becoming the norm. That's interesting. Just because people can talk about it, and you're not going to be again burned at the stake for being weird or because if it's at the fringe, it's not necessarily the norm, right? Because people would have to go to the fringe for it to be there. Most people aren't there, right? Yeah, just reading this here. So the mind being there, it's almost like it's an exercise for the mind. The mind's able to like open itself up and it can see its own limits, but that could lead down to delusion or psychosis. Like psychosis is there too. So we need to be careful. And that's where that epistemological like tool set can help you differentiate between psychosis. Right? And so the main character, this greater mind yet that is to be. So this notion of becoming. And the Peaceful Warrior, that film, he says that when Dan says, I don't know, he says that's the first lesson or the first step of the warrior, not knowing, which is good. Have you watched that yet?
I saw it like 10 years ago.
Oh, okay.
That's the same as me. I remember I watched it. I think with my ex, but yeah. I watch it again.
And so opens itself to a vast objectivity. So that's just the external world, really. And the cosmos. Yeah. Okay. So this is a good one. And then it goes to that Hegel point at the end, right? Okay. So let's go to the next chapter here. Okay. So this one is shorter. They're not that long going forward. So this is the aging paradox. So two women are having lunch, an English professor and an author. And does anybody want to read this one? Or
So there's two. I'll read one part once you read the other one.
yeah,
There's two ladies.
yeah, go, yeah. I think the one lady talked the most, for sure.
Time just dissolves into quick moving particles that are swirling away. Either I'm moving fast or time is never both simultaneously.
It's such a strange paradox. I mean, while technically I'm closer to the end of my life than I've ever been, I actually feel more than ever that I have all the time in the world. When I was younger, there was a desperation, a desire for certainty. Like there was an end to the path and I had to get there.
I know what you mean, because I can remember thinking, oh, someday, like in my mid-30s, maybe everything's gonna somehow gel and settle, just end. It was like there was this plateau and it was waiting for me and I was climbing up it. And when I got to the top, all the growth and change would stop, even exhilaration. But that hasn't happened like that, thank goodness. I think that what we don't take into account when we're young is our endless curiosity. That's what's so great about being human.
Yeah. Well, do you know that thing Benedict Anderson says about identity?
No.
Well, he's talking about, like, let's say a baby picture. So you pick up this picture, this two-dimensional image, and you say, that's me. Well, I try to connect this baby in this little weird image with yourself living, and breathing in the present. You have to make up a story like, this was me when I was a year old, then later I had long hair, and we moved to Riverdale, and now here I am. So it takes a story that's actually a fiction to make you and the baby in the picture identical to create your identity.
And the funny thing is, our cells are completely regenerating every 7 years. We've already become completely different people several times over, and yet we always remain quintessentially ourselves.
Yeah, so this is a discussion about identity, right? And this at the beginning, there's this notion of like well-being as we develop and as we get older. And there's a lot of evidence that the older we get, our well-being increases because we learn to focus on meaningful things and not pleasurable things. And then there's usually an integration. You have more social health, social life. And there's evidence to show that the more integrated socially you are with healthy relationships, you actually live longer. So yeah, so there's this contrast between being young and looking at yourself and then being that age and actually knowing what it is, right? And then we have this notion of the identity. So I don't think the story is fiction, actually. I think that's just false in this.
But it's partially fiction, because I think I don't think it wasn't science, but I've heard before, somebody could clarify, where our memory is never a perfect representation of what actually happened, or how we're feeling and thinking and what actually happened. Some study about like an accident, 4 people saw the same event occurring, and then they put them on the stand, and every person had a different story, but they all saw the same thing.
Sure.
Which is how our memories operate. And so when you put people in a different state, you can remember an event that happened in the past differently. Like if I'm in a really good state and I think about something in my past, I'll put a positive spin on it. I'll think about it optimistically, how it could help me. But if I'm depressed, I might look at my past and victimize myself because what happened. So the way
your current state influences the construction of the memory. And the memories are always constructed as new in the moment. Yeah. It's not like a computer where you pull up the information, it's like the same every time. Yeah, for sure.
Why when you compare the young and the elder, you said something like, when you're young, you're looking for things that bring you pleasure, but when you're elder, you look at things that are more meaningful. But you try to say that the elder people are more mature. But why pleasure? Why aiming at pleasure is not as good as aiming at things that are meaningful?
It's just because of the nature of the orientation or what your attention is on. Like the pleasurable things are fleeting, and they're not actually like correlated to increasing your well-being. So, for example, like the mistake, like somebody is in an unhealthy relationship, they have poor stress coping mechanisms. The relationship's causing them a lot of distress and they're upset. And so they resort to alcohol and they feel good. And they're like, my life is fine. I just have a glass of wine every now and then or whatever, they minimize it. And then the other person recognizes that the relationship is the problem. They go through some suffering to rearrange their social life. And then they don't have that constant, negative input from that relationship. And then they don't have to drink anymore, right? Or like in the chapter on the website, I talk about devoting yourself to a meaningful purpose. Or I read that story by Isaac Asimov, how all of human like knowledge is in the wisp, and then it creates its own cosmos. So yeah, I think it's just.
But wait a minute, drinking, I can understand, I can agree with it, but that's called addiction.
Yeah.
But you're talking about pleasure. Pleasure is different than addiction.
I'm just going with the hedonism point. I think it's just that part of it can be values. But as a young person, you may have not had the experience or the testing of different things to see that some things are more valuable than others. If you were brought up in a certain way, sure, but on your own, you haven't like had the time to like test stuff out, But then
something are more valuable than the other.
Like for example,
like the people will, I agree. I'm just trying to play the devil advocate. So some people say, meaning is just all relative. I could assign something. Like a drink of coffee, it's all very subjective, as you mentioned. Everything is subjective. Why you say something's more meaningful? Why you?
Yeah. So if part of it's going to be a subjective report. So psychologists will say a subjective report, meaning like, what do you feel from this thing, right? And you can do like a lie detector. One sec, Josh. You can do a lie detector thing to see if this person's going to if their self-serving bias is really high, they try to make things seem better than they really are. or the experimenter expectancy effect. Like, what do you want as the experimenter? Like, what do you want from the study? And I'll just do what you want me to do.
Mhm.
Both of those bias the results from self-report, right?
Mhm.
And so, no, experimenter expectancy effect is when the experimenter's expectations influence the results, but there's also the participants' awareness of what they think the experimenter wants will influence what their results are. So, yeah, okay, so yeah, that's just the data that they found predominantly.
So you're saying, well, isn't the pleasure I mean, all these things are just relative. It's very subjective.
Yeah.
Anything is higher than the others?
I think that you can measure some things. Like you could have like a wrist thing that measures your stress, like a galvanized response from your skin or your heart rate. And you could just say this lifestyle is giving you this, like if you quantify how much stress there is, and then you could say this lifestyle gives you less stress. That's one way you can measure it, right? Another way you could just do the self-report thing over time. And you can say like this person that is doing a monotonous job, right? Like in a factory versus somebody that's doing something of a relatively equivalent pay, but I like to use the example of being a gardener, working at Allen Gardens or something like that, you know? And they may find more meaning, or volunteering or working for a nonprofit. It's something that's directly in line with your values. Okay, one second. We gotta like do a one of these.
So some lives are more valuable than the other lives.
Nope, not the life. It's like the lifestyle, how you're living,
Lifestyle.
right?
Like Elon Musk's lifestyle is more valuable than a gardener.
Not necessarily. No, they would depend on that person's values, and if their values are correlated with their decisions in their lifestyle. Because some people might be doing things that they don't want to do, like you talked about before, about working a job that sucks.
And
Right.
some people might not want Elon's lifestyle. They look at his life and they're like, "There's no way I would want that. I really love what I'm doing."
Yeah.
And they're a gardener, for example, right?
Sure.
So that's what I'm saying. Everything's relative.
It's not, well, it's relative to you, right? But like just like the Hegelian point from before, it's just the same story. And part of it is that you can make choices. Like there's some things about your identity that are about your being that you can identify with or not, but it's not up to you. Like I'm a man, you know, this is what I am. I was born that way, right? And if I feel differently about myself or the reality, that's independent of what it really is, right? Again, psychosis is the inability to know reality from non-reality.
Sorry.
That's
the link you were just making is hilarious.
no, it's true,
Yeah.
right? And so that's important to recognize. And if you're deriving suffering from things that are, right, you can go down a healthy path of integrating what you acknowledge and what is, or a healthy or unhealthy path, right? Okay, Dodgy, what do you want to say, buddy?
Hey, I just wanted to indirectly ask you a question by asking Sami a question, and maybe you can criticize both me and Sami after Sami gives a response. It's because I had a conversation previously with Sami about psychedelics, and I think he has a unique perspective on what is meaningful and rewarding.
Yeah.
He previously told me why he hesitates to take psychedelics, and mostly it is the meaning of taking psychedelics. One thing he told me is that once you've taken psychedelics, you can't say you've never taken psychedelics after. And it's
Okay.
yeah, and like there's
You want to
meaning
take a pilot,
less-
then maybe that's a problem. Yeah, you can't have done acid and honestly. So sure, okay.
Yeah. The question is like he's finding meaning in not taking an action, but in his resistance to taking an action that in itself has meaning. So I think he has a unique perspective on things that are meaningful and versus just rewarding. So it just touches on the previous point that David was talking about. So I just want to ask Sami, like, what's your perspective on meaningful things? And I don't mean just in psychedelics.
Is
But-
Sammy in the chat group?
Yeah, he's right there. He's just right above me.
Yeah, right here.
No, I know you're in this right now, but are you in the chat group as well?
What's up? Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, yeah, cool. So what's up? What's up, Sammy? Hi, hey, buddy.
How you doing? I mean, I wouldn't really describe it as I gain meaning or anything from this. It's just my thoughts on let's say substances is that if you've never done them, then you don't really know what you're missing, and so therefore you have no craving for them, right? You don't know what you're missing out on if you've never taken alcohol or marijuana or psychedelics or anything like that. And so I prefer to be in that state where I don't know what I'm missing, because it makes it so that I lose nothing by trying these things or by not being able to try these things.
Okay, well, yeah, there's a couple things here. So one is psychedelics are non-addictive, so the craving point doesn't make sense in this context. The second thing would be, ignorance is bliss, sure, but is it wise? So for example, some people have done the hero dose of mushrooms and they were alcoholics or they were addicted to cigarettes. And after they did this treatment, they were not addicted to these substances anymore. And so their well-being increased. Or people that suffer from PTSD, right?
Yeah, this might not apply to psychedelics because I do see a lot of benefits for it, particularly for those who are already needing, significant amounts of psychiatric help.
Sure.
But this might apply more to, I guess, other kinds of substances.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I don't think doing cocaine is a good idea, because it's highly addictive and it's really bad for your heart. And there may be some positive elements in the sense that it makes you alert, it's the party drug. There's that thing there. But for me, I am not willing to do that because of the addictive property for sure. And that's the main thing. And there's a couple of things like the reduction of self-control. I find that people can become violent under cocaine. Or super arrogant. I don't see it's increasing in wisdom, for example, or enlightenment. Whereas doing a DMT thing, I haven't done it yet, but I'm like, well, I wouldn't want to do it. I think about it this way: when Yoda says, I'm going to meditate on that thing, it's like he has an idea and he's being mindful of the idea. If I have a bunch of stress and then I do psychedelics, the psychedelics are going to kind of be about that stress. So, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I would rather deal with my stress first and then have an open mind and then allow myself to see what is. But one of the criticisms of that could be well, maybe the psychedelics will help you deal with that stress better, right? You're just not seeing something. So I don't know.
Yeah. Also, I would say that if you're already kind of in a spot where you don't have much to lose, then psychedelics could, be worth the risk. Whereas if it's just, you're already in a good place and you really have everything put together, there is a sense of risk there because you don't really know exactly how it's going to affect your future mental state or thought process. And it's better, I guess, to wait until more research has been done on this, more people have, are able to talk about the specific ways that it could affect you, before experimenting with this kind of stuff.
I think that knowing the drug is the first step, understanding quantity and toxicity so that you don't overdose if overdosing is a thing. And then the safety of the drug, you don't want to take something that has fentanyl in it and you fucking OD because of that. So we'll put those aside.
Yeah,
and
that's another matter.
Right, make sure that's not a problem. And then a big part of it, I think, is just the setting. If you're going to do a spiritual mental health thing, because it's you, for me, my openness to experience might be a little bit higher than yours. So my personality, I'm willing to try things like that and I'm comfortable with it. And a big part of it is the context you're in. If you're with people that you observe that they do it and they don't die, you observe that they do it and they're not having a episode that seems like they're increasing their suffering, then just through that experience, that's, it's I don't want to not in a negative way, but it's a gateway to see what this environment's like. And if you're comfortable with healthy people, you can do it. But if you're with people they're watching horror movies and doing mushrooms, I'm bro, that is for me insane. That is craziness. So I'm not going to do that. But if you're going to meditate and lie in the grass and reflect on your sense of self, one of the recent times I did mushrooms, I did a gram or something like that. I had this because I'm almost 40 now, I had this thing where I was I need to have children soon. It was everything else in your life is fucking bullshit. And it was a deep anxiety that I was I can't shake this. And it was not just having a kid, but finding a woman that I'm comfortable with her mothering my children. Mm-hmm. So if I'm gone, the family is going to be okay. Mm-hmm. Right. And so that's heavy. And I wouldn't have had that feeling. We can talk about it, but like you will have a feeling when you do things like mushrooms. And to
But it-
stay in ignorance because of some fear, I'm like, for me, it's not I'm like, I need to check to make sure, you know?
like I do hear things about like ego death, for example,
Yeah.
or how psychedelics could like change, like at a fundamental level, change your thought process.
Sure.
It kind of seems like it's changing
Right.
who you are, you know, on the deepest level, and so that is kind of more of what I'm talking about. How does that work?
Yeah, I have a paper I wrote 2 years ago. So I'll post that into the chat group once I'm done this. And then I'll even share the journal article that talks about it. It's with ketamine, problem with ketamine for ego death problem. And it's been tested for a treatment for major depressive disorder because it removes the rumination property of thinking, which is a function of the DNS system. And so you can read on that. But again, the problem with ketamine is it is addictive. And so I think that if you're going to go in that hole, you need to have like countermeasures to make sure that you don't become addictive. And if those countermeasures aren't in place and they're not known, then you shouldn't do it.
Also ayahuasca as well, right? So
yeah, ayahuasca. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. 100%.
It's not DMT.
Yeah. It's a different form. Okay. We're going on to the next thing. Everybody ready? You got your paddles?
Sorry, one last thing.
One last thing.
They talk about like every 7 years. Your
Oh, yeah. Your cells
is
regenerate.
that there's a philosophical
The Shipathesis.
yeah, it's similar.
Yeah, I
So
think the
what-
Shipathesis, you can't just take a snapshot, static view of a thing. The thing is becoming over time. And so you need to look at a 4D version of it, not just a 3D version. You have to incorporate time into it,
In COVID time. Okay.
right? And then, yeah, it just has to do with how we're using language. A lot of philosophical problems really, I would say, come from the place of language and thought. And sometimes we go out of place, and that's where we're like, oh, there's a problem here. But you're just, because you're looking at it very unilaterally. Like it's like one dimension, but there's a couple dimensions. And when you can appreciate that, then you can say, I am now passing from the desert to the forest. And we get these problems of subjectivity where you're like, no, the desert and the forest are different. You know, they're not the same, right? And it's not because of, if you've only ever been in the forest, you're like, yeah, I've seen some sand. Yeah, I've seen it before. It's, you know, it's whatever. And then if you've only been in the desert, you're like, I don't know, I've seen like roots or something, or like a weird little shrubby thing, or there's an oasis. Like I've been to the oasis. It's not that big though. There's a lot more dunes than oasis, right? And so I think that in the philosophical landscape, we can get some confusion there. All right,
Right. Yeah.
chapter 8, noise and silence.
hold on. I'd like to respond to that because I really agree with what you said just now about a lot of philosophy being caught up on the wording. Especially with like my favorite interest in philosophy being metaethics. I feel like a lot of metaethics is just people being confused on words, what good and bad even mean, things like that. And you know, once people, you know, actually sit down and concretely define these things, I mean, ethics solves itself basically, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I'm when it comes to ethics, I believe there are ethical principles and we have to apply those to cases. And there is an issue of the normative, the naturalistic fallacy, the is-ought problem, but it's really just an application of these things. It's like a skill set. So knowing beneficence is the duty to do good, and then seeing situations where you can act beneficently is being ethical.
I feel like the is-ought problem is just a confusion of wording. It's really just semantics.
Yeah, really what it means is that the description of the world is different than the way the world ought to be. And logically, there is a it becomes invalid from an argumentative standpoint when you go from the way the world is to the way the world ought to be, therefore the way the world should be like this. In some ways, it's begging the question because you haven't proven from descriptions that this is actually what's supposed to happen, or have you shown that even if this is what's supposed to happen, how do we apply it to this specific case?
Yeah, I don't want to take too much of your time, so don't want to really go into it, but like I personally have a system where you can derive ought from is, and it's very simple
Okay.
actually.
We can talk about that. Let's go. Let's. Okay, do you want to just say it really quick?
No, it's okay. It's ethical naturalism, but like a specific form of it.
Okay.
Teleological ethical naturalism.
All right, interesting. You can bring it up more later if you want. Okay, so noise and silence. So this is where the chimpanzee is speaking. So does anybody want to read this one? It's basically like a professor, but it's Stephen Finch.
I'll ready to go.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
I read the first one.
Yeah, David, do the first one where the ... and then the one below, and then the guy in the
There's a
restaurant.
chimp sitting next to the projector. The words noise and silence are written onto the screen, and the chimp begins lecturing. Voice of Steve Finch. Our critique began as all critiques begin. With doubt, doubt became our narrative. Ours was a quest for a new story, our own, and we graphed toward this new history driven by the suspicion that ordinary language couldn't tell it. Our past appeared frozen in the distance, and our every gesture and accent signified the negation of the old world and the reach for a new one. The way we lived created a new situation, one of exuberance and friendship, that was subversive micro-society in the heart of a society which ignored it. Art was not the goal, but the occasion and the method for locating our specific rhythm and the buried possibility of our time. The discovery of a true communication was what it was all about. Or at least the quest for such a communication. The adventure of finding it and losing it. We then unappeased, then unaccepting, continue looking, filling in the silence with our own wishes, fears, and fantasies. Driven forward by the fact that no matter how empty the world seemed, no matter how degraded and used up the world appeared to us, we knew that anything was still possible. And given the right circumstances, a new world was just as likely as an old one. The lecture chimp eats his notes, and to begin again from the beginning is placed on the screen. A young male's face is flashed on the screen, and the projector runs on.
Cool. Okay, so this one, the notion of critique brings to mind like postmodernism. And then, obviously doubt is this, we can talk about skepticism a bit here. And then your point about language, the limits of language is here in the next statement, right? The old world and the new world, that's an idea that even the MAGA Republicans talk about a lot, and it's a very conservative approach. They're in the Great Warring States in China, there is this idealization of the old and a move to try to bring people back to these old ritualistic ways of being. But he's talking about moving towards the new world. And in the video at this point, he's showing like punk rock, or not punk rock, but like grunge rock, and this like anti-establishment movement, which also will connect to our Alex Jones topic here, or comment.
But he also shows, just to point out, Kurt Cobain, who ended up killing himself. Maybe there's some meaning in that.
Maybe. How would you connect the suicide to these statements here?
Well, maybe the suicide signified some change in a new generation's mind, and that created some kind of aggressive anti-establishment stance because they linked his suicide with perhaps his lyrics or the meaning of his lyrics.
We can talk about that, sure. Like that's it's not like, I don't think it's necessarily the case that it could be that way, but that's a possibility. I think the anti-establishment came before. Like Kurt Cobain was part of that establishment. He wasn't the cause of it.
But he could be a symbol of that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And that's why they placed him in the thing.
Yeah. I don't know about the suicide thing, but the anti-establishment part for sure.
Right.
And he's talking about the role of art. I'm just reading through
I
here.
don't know if I agree with that. The occasion and the method for locating our specific rhythm and buried possibility. It's very poetic.
So he's just saying that art's not the focus of like it's the way you're acting. You're acting in like lifestyle is art. Like the way you live is supposed to be a form of art in some ways.
Right.
Right? It's the method for locating our specific rhythm, which is like lifestyle,
Yeah.
and buried possibilities of our time. So, you know, I think that's existentialist. There's some humanism there.
Sure. No, I'm not disagreeing, but I think from the perspective of an artist, a real artist, a professional artist, they might disagree with that statement.
Okay. What do you think, Jerry? Jerry has a degree in painting.
Oh, wow.
About what? Sorry.
Oh, dude.
Yeah, I'm going to read this statement to you.
Sorry.
This is a great example, right?
My mind wandered. I was thinking
Okay, we're going to put this in your mind. Ready?
Yeah.
Art was not the goal, but the occasion and the method for locating our specific rhythm and buried possibilities of our time. What do you have any other?
Yeah. So
Where does that say that? Where does it say that? Let me just see it for a second.
It's right here.
So maybe from your perspective, when you do art, is it a method? Is it like a vehicle, or is it in itself like a goal, like the act of creation, and you're making something, and that thing is?
Yeah, it's the second thing. Yeah, it's like a process. You start with like one small idea, and then, or you know, you have a small like the first step you start with, and then you kind of add on to it and add on to it.
Maybe I'll ask a better question. Why do you make art?
Oh, pleasure, right? And it's a statement too, right? It's a statement.
Is it about the product, or is it about the process?
And what's the difference?
That's a good question. I think they're both important.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is one artist. We could do.
Well, the process is very important. Definitely, it's like it like is healing. Could be very healing, you know, because it takes a lot of work to like get the lines just right, you know, and like you might have to erase it or like paint over it, right? And then once you just get it, it's like it's this like process, right? Of
Right. And then there's the
you
act
put a
of
lot of
completion.
energy into it, right? And then
How about what's the
look at it at the
feeling
end and-
when you've completed?
Oh, it's great. It's great. Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you were able to translate what you were trying to do on the paper properly, then it's like it's successful. And if it doesn't quite work, you're not happy with it, right? Yeah.
Okay, let's read one more statement from here. So he says, driven forward by the fact that no matter how empty the world seemed, no matter how degraded and used up the world appeared to us, we knew that anything was still possible.
Optimistic.
Right? So I think that's good. And then this notion of possibility, high degree practical possibility, you know, in some ways as well. So that's cool. Okay, next one. So main character sitting with a man in a bar restaurant, University of Texas, philosopher Louis McKay. So your turn, Austin.
All right. There are two kinds of sufferers in this world: those who suffer from a lack of life, and those who suffer from an overabundance of life. I've always found myself in the second category. When you come to think of it, almost all human behavior and activity is not essentially any different from animal behavior. The most advanced technologies and craftsmanship bring us, at best, up to the super chimpanzee level. Actually, the gap between, say, Plato or Nietzsche and the average human is greater than the gap between the chimpanzee and the average human. The realm of the spirit, the realm of the real spirit, the true artist, the saint, the philosopher, is rarely achieved. Why so few? Why is world history and evolution not stories of progress, but rather endless and futile additions of zeros? No greater values have developed. Hell, the Greeks 3,000 years ago were just as advanced as we are. So what are these barriers that keep people from reaching anywhere near their real potential? The answer to that can be found in another question, and that's this: what is the most universal human characteristic, fear or laziness?
Very good. So the answer is both. It's a false dichotomy.
But it's both, but it's not most. I would say both are true, but they're not both most the universal human characteristics. That makes
No.
sense?
Yes. Yeah, this is a great point just about when we look at the potential humans have and we survey how many achieve it, they don't. And so why is it the case that this happens? And I think that's awesome. His projection of these two properties, fear or laziness, can account for a lot of it, but I think that it's not like, fear is not acting because of some appraisal of your situation or yourself. right? It's you're scared and you're not doing a thing that you would do, and that sense of feeling fear prevents you from doing it, right?
There's also the fear that compels you to move. Say, for example, fear of a lion, or the fear of death, the fear of feeling insignificant, and that propels you.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like that. That's good. And then the laziness part, or apathy, we can even maybe say.
Complacency.
Yeah, being comfortable. Like someone wrote on my board in my house, I think it was Dimitri, comfort is the enemy of progress or something like that.
That's great.
Or
Love it.
creativity.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think this is important. I would like to add a big chunk here and talk about the socialization factors, the values of society, our awareness of ourselves. Like, where does the philosophy, how can the philosophy study put people on the right path, right?
Mhm.
And part of it is establishing meaning in life that directs you towards your own greatness, whatever that might be,
Mhm.
you know?
So I gotta play the devil.
Yeah.
So is it some arrogance here? Like, why you say that Plato and Nietzsche are, you already take it for granted that they are the excellence among the peoples. This is some arrogance from some philosophers.
Is it arrogant though? Maybe there's a different word we can use. Arrogance is accepting or not accepting when you make a mistake. So
Like
maybe
a-
it's like patronizing or condescending, like he's talking down to people, or he's speaking from a position of superiority.
Yeah.
Maybe that,
So,
or
you know,
or elitist. You can maybe
Yeah.
criticize it that way.
yeah, I don't know what was the exact word, but he quoting, he said the gap between say Plato and Nietzsche and the average human is greater than the gap between whatever, so then people gonna argue, who tell you Plato and Nietzsche are among the elite? Nietzsche himself become crazy, sick at the end of his life.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe just saying like these books, if you can analyze what they've produced,
Mhm.
right? And no one's really come close to either of these guys
That's true.
on both realms. Like Aristotle, yeah, like, we can talk about it, but that's a big thing. And then how many people read it?
Mhm.
Like their legacy is pretty strong.
And how many ideas come from their ideas, right?
But are you assuming, because you use the legacy, are you assuming something here? Are you assuming that the philosophers or the you're assuming books are good, books
Okay.
some books classified. But is it truly a relativism? Maybe they say this is a West centralism. Plato,
Western, yeah.
Western central, Plato or Mayo central.
I think that criticism is just irrelevant. I think we can look at the merit of the thing based on the thing itself, and then very other few people have created that equivalence in their own way. Whether it's in book format or whatnot doesn't really matter. It's the ideas that are being conveyed and the way in which they're being conveyed that does have merit, And it's just that I think it's a value thing. Like Socrates was put to death by the state, and that really my professor, Dr. Berg, said that's the reason why Plato wrote what he did. He was really upset, and he just wanted to try to show the problems of society, that a democracy could kill one of, in his opinion, the greatest people that ever existed.
And also you have to consider all the positive effects that have occurred as a result, because we could come up with any scenario. I was having a conversation with a friend earlier, which is that it's not productive to think, if things would have been this way, then in the present it would have been this way, because we don't know what would have happened, right? If they hadn't existed, or if somebody else was emphasized in history, we don't know how the world would have turned out. But I think we can all agree that because of you brought up those particular names, but because of those names, the world is better, not worse.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good point too.
Well, I'm not quoting it. Even in the philosophical world, you mentioned postmodernism, the anti-establishment. Like Nietzsche is actually criticized
he's
Kant a lot.
He's like the grandfather of postmodernism.
Yeah,
in some ways.
exactly. So even among the philosophical world, there's people say anti-establishment, like Plato is an establishment. The anti-establishment is like, everything's just relative. Everything is not. It's the postmodernism. If you read some of them, their work, they even say the most important thing is not about the book. It's how you interpret the book. Whatever you interpret, it's great. There's no good or no bad.
Yeah, I disagree with that. It's self-refuting, right? Like things are just incorrect sometimes. You know, like like the previous talk about how there's sexual information in that story, which is wrong. It's just wrong.
Mhm.
You know, and we can talk about psychosis too. You know, some people they're just not able to see. Right. All right. Next chapter. So the first one, I'm just going to paraphrase some of these so we can just move forward because there's not too much in them.
Yep.
There are two people in a coffee shop. One guy's writing a novel and the girl's like, "What are you writing?" He's like, "I'm writing a story." She's like, "What's in the story?" And he just kind of, his people, gestures, movements, rapture, fleeting emotions. He's saying that's the greatest story ever told. So he's just kind of making a comment about narratives. Are you in the story? He's like, "I'm reading it and writing it." So it's the sense that he is the story. It is all him, right? The next one is a guy in a bar, an actor named Stephen Prince is talking with the bartender. And so the guy is giving this story about how he's justifying having a gun. And he's saying that he was working in this gas station and this guy was stealing stuff. And then the guy was going to attack him, the gas station attendant. And so he shot him a bunch of times. And it was an intense experience. It was really hard for me. Watch the film. It's cool. And then the bartender says, "Well, does it even work?" And then he pulls the trigger because he's drinking and he's drunk and he shoots the bartender. And then the bartender goes underneath the bar and grabs his gun and shoots him right in the face, an eye for an eye.
Yeah.
Right. And so there is a little bit we can talk about here in the sense, a well-armed populace is the best defense against tyranny.
That's the line.
So that's, we could talk about that, but also a well-armed populace can misuse their armaments.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what happened in here. So it's an interesting
narrative.
Why don't you pull the trigger and find out? And he shoots him.
Yeah.
And so, yes, a well-armed populace, but the tyrannical government could use that well-armed populace against itself. That's also a thing, right? There needs to be one of the best quotes is, "With great power comes great responsibility," right? From me, Amazing Fantasy, I forget what number it is. Spider-Man, when Uncle Ben dies, right? And I think that's important to figure out. You look super cute today.
Oh, thanks.
It's the context that matters here because they're both in the bar. They're both drinking. I think we should point that out.
I think just one guy is drinking. The bartender, I'm not sure.
Sure. But I guess in that setting, it would make sense that a conversation like that, first of all, it's you could see it's a very, I don't know how to describe it politely, but you could see the nature of the conversation, right? If somebody reads the transcript and it's just a very loose and not, I don't know what the right word to describe the conversation is, but
it's like bantering.
It's banter.
They're talking shit in the bar, like whatever.
They're talking shit in the bar, right? And so there's not much substance. I guess that's the phrase that I want to use. There's not much substance in the conversation. And so maybe that's a reflection of their state of mind and how you can have that line, "A well-armed populace is the best defense against tyranny," and it could be true, but that line could be interpreted like we were just talking about, right? Differently according to who an individual is. So you can take these gun-toting, beer-swilling people with no substance, for example. I'm not saying that anybody's like that, but you could take a person who's like that, and take that phrase, put it into their brain, and now they believe something, and they just go around swinging their guns around, right?
Well, it's the same problem of interpretation again that we have with religion. It's the same thing.
Well, what I'm saying is this particular scene, right, with this conversation in this context with that line, I think the gun itself is a lot different because it immediately takes a life. It has the potential of immediately taking a life, and in a very aggressive way, an intentional way.
Okay.
Right. So religion is the way they were constructed. If you look at the major religions, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, they were not constructed to destroy.
As a gun, sure.
Yeah, they were not constructed that way.
Yeah, yeah.
They were constructed for various reasons, but one of the reasons is to, for example, bring people together, move them towards a common mission. Maybe they had a goal, et cetera, right? So I don't want to get into the complexities between religion and
It's fine. I'm just talking about interpretation.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Being
What's
used
your
for negative
interpretation? I guess. Like, do you agree with that? Or? I don't have an opinion. By the way, I'm not
No,
pro or
it's just-
anti-gun. I don't know.
I think it's just they're just trying to show what's wrong with this statement. A well-armed populace is a defense against tyranny.
But
True.
is it wrong?
Well, but the guy kills the other guy, right? That means that you're going to have people that are not of sound mind having guns,
Yeah.
and then they're going to the reason that you have military personnel or police officers with guns is because they're supposed to uphold some professional conduct so that they don't do what this guy did. They don't just shoot somebody by accident. That's what they're supposed to do. Whether it's enacted properly is a different thing, right? But I think there's a difference there, is that one is like those that have the guns are supposed to have some responsibility to that gun. This guy is not, like tyranny is a government thing. The specific situation he did was being stolen from, right? And his life was under threat because the guy charged him with a knife, and so he shot him, right? So in that context, self-defense, fine. But him pulling the gun out, pointing it at the guy, and then pulling the trigger was fucking manslaughter, right? And then there's the thing that the guy just didn't fall down and die. The comical, satirical nature is that he pulled out his gun and shot him too, right? And so
there's a juxtaposition between a statement that can be used because it's true, and that's the reason the Second Amendment existed in the first place, and people using it irresponsibly for whatever reason, right?
Yeah, so like, where do you draw the limits and stuff like that? And like, and then you could say should they allow guns in the bar?
That's a great question.
Right?
People are inebriated, drinking.
You can't drink and drive, so why could you have a gun on you? When you're drinking? Right? So, very good. Okay, next one. So I'll just paraphrase this one. So the main character, the guy who's lucid dreaming, wakes up, tries to phone. So this is like going back to like the context of the film. It's just trying to show that he's in this dream. He makes a phone call. The person doesn't answer. Then he starts watching TV. And so there's some garbage here. He's just flipping through the channels. And then there's this one statement: "For I do not await the future," as he's flipping through the channels, "anticipating salvation, absolution, not even enlightenment through process. I ascribe to the premise that this flawed perfection is sufficient and complete in every single ineffable moment." For me, especially the term salvation, that's Christianity. And really what this guy's saying is he's saying the present moment is sufficient. There's no need for the afterlife. There is no such thing as perfection. And then we have the lunatic macaroni munction with my gugat. That's a criticism to politics. He's saying they just speak gobbledygook, right? And then this is a meta point about the film. The venerable tradition of sorcerers, shamans, and other visionaries who have developed and perfected the art of dream travel, the so-called lucid dream state, whereby consciously controlling your dreams, you're able to discover things beyond your capacity to apprehend in your waking state. So one thing is that I don't think the guy's actually lucid dreaming. He's just remembering his dream. He becomes lucid kind of later on, right, when he's talking to the girl. Again, lucid dreaming, to comprehend things beyond a wake state. There is a theory about dreams that is like that, right? And lucid dream, dreams in general, but then being lucid about them, it's not just lucidity. So I wrote a paper this summer. It's not just lucidity that promotes mental health. It would be being in control of your dreams, right? To exercise control. So being aware is like step one, but then exercising control. So for people that suffer from PTSD, right? Like if you're in a building that's being blown up, you're able to be like Magneto and move all the bad parts away, and you can protect people. You have to control something. Okay, so there's that. So that's like a point. That's kind of just discussing the nature of the film in itself. And then he goes back to the previous guy that talks about the salvation. A single ego is an absurdly narrow vintage from which to view this experience. So that in itself is something that all egos, there's the large E experience, the category of experience in general is something that egos do, right? And Kant could talk about that, right? Our transcendental nature. Where most consider their individual relationship to the universe, I contemplate relationships of my various selves to one another. That is fucking awesome. I really like that one. Daniel Dennett says consciousness is simply a committee of selves. And I talk about the nature of selfness, right? That's
not a Jungian idea.
Jung talks about archetypes, and the self is one of his archetypes.
What about echo chamber?
Yeah, echo chamber is like you have a community of people that only repeat back the things that you agree with.
Yeah.
Right? Which is like our social groups, and the Philosophy Society if there is some echo chamber property within this, it's just those principles of being philosophical so that we can talk about our disagreements. So that is here, but it's supposed to be within the realm of
The self.
it's supposed to be functional. With the self, when you disagree with yourself or think like we have to understand the nature of the self. And I have videos on that online. Basically, it's just like there's the being and there's different units of self within the being. And how do we differentiate those? That's kind of tough to talk about, but like how do you define unit of self? And that's like one of the philosophical things that I'm working on right now, actually. I think there are properties, and when you're aware of it, you can manipulate your self-expression in the moment so that you're more healthy and more coherent with all the other selves.
Yeah, agreed.
And there are different types of selves, right? So like Plato is a self in my head, and Plato made me have in my view of what Plato is. So there is a bias of me, the being, and its understanding of Plato. So if you only knew the allegory of the cave, that would be your Plato self. But if you've read the works of Plato, then your Plato self would be bigger, right? And that Plato self can argue with Derrida, where Derrida says there is no truth
Who's
or
that
whatever.
guy? Derrida?
He's a postmodern,
Postmodernist.
Oh.
like French guy. So yeah, I think that this is important to talk about this notion of self. So that's the first time this has come into our thing here. Okay, so let's go to the next chapter, make a little bit of progress. We have 15 minutes left. Let's see what we can get through. So, okay, so chapter 10, dreams. The main character walks into a white building with stained glass windows and approaching a man sitting in the chair. So now we go explicitly into what dreams are and the nature of dreams. Who wants to read the first section here?
Yeah, I'll read it.
Okay.
You know, they say dreams are real only as long as they last. Couldn't you say the same thing about life? See, there's a lot of us that are out there that are mapping the mind-body relationship of dreams. We're called the
Anironauts.
Yeah. We're the explorers of the dream world. Really, it's just about the two opposing states of consciousness, which don't really oppose at all. See, in the waking world, the neural system inhibits the activation of the vividness of memories. And this makes evolutionary sense. So you'd be maladapted for the perceptual image of a predator to be mistaken for the memory of one, and vice versa. If the memory of a predator conjured up a perceptual image, we would be running off to the bathroom every time we had a scary thought. So you have these serotonergic, I guess,
serotonin.
That's the real word, neurons that inhibit hallucinations, that they themselves are inhibited during REM sleep. See, this allows dreams to appear real while preventing competition from other perceptual processes. This is why dreams are mistaken for reality. To the functional system of neural activity that creates our world, there's no difference between dreaming a perception and an action and actually the waking perception and action.
Yeah, so this stuff is correct. It's good to be a little bit of science, psychology science here on what the neurology of dreaming is. It is super complicated. There's a whole bunch of different parts of the brain that have to basically switch off for sleep to be engaged, right? Okay, so next, the guy playing the ukulele. Jeremy, you do this one.
I had a friend once who told me that the worst mistake that you can make is to think you are alive when you're really asleep in life's waiting. The trick is to combine your waking rational abilities with the infinite possibilities of your dreams. Because if you can do that, you can do anything. Did you ever have a job that you hated, worked really hard at, a long, hard day at work? Finally, when you get home, get into bed, close your eyes, and immediately wake up and realize that the whole day at work has been a dream. It's bad enough that you sell your waking life for minimum wage, but now they get your dreams for free.
Yeah, so this is the anti-establishment point again, which is a critique about our economy or capitalism or just working in general, and the contrast between work, selling your time for money, and quote unquote, the infinite possibilities of your dreams.
I think he's trying to make a deeper point here, which is that when you're living a life where there's a lot of emotional salience, you feel strong emotions. that experience is more easily replicated in your dreams. Like if something is like really, something is happening, you're feeling something,
Mm.
a job that you hate or something that you love, it's very often the case that you will experience some form of that in your dreams.
Maybe a little bit, yeah, sure. I don't know about the whole day at work was like, like my
Yeah.
entire night, I wasn't just only dreaming about like, it's like, I don't have that life.
But you can also see how this guy is a hippie playing a ukulele,
Yeah, yeah.
probably, poor and bad life decisions. And now he's on the floor playing a ukulele
Sure.
and he's just spewing all this stuff because he never worked hard a day in his life, potentially, right? I'm making a lot of judgments there, but
Well, again, the artist, right? Like we don't have to, like there's the accumulation of wealth and then there's well-being.
Mhm.
And the accumulation of wealth to a certain point will predict happiness and well-being, right? So
Yeah.
this guy, he can be a hippie and still have his shit together. He doesn't necessarily have to be dysfunctional.
but it's very often the case that typically people who rag on the 1%, people who are protesting on, like they just didn't have their lives together. That was
Yeah, yeah,
evident. That
yeah,
was
yeah,
evident.
yeah, yeah.
They have this, they don't love the poor, just like people who care about the virtue signaling stuff, right? People over there and over here, they don't love these people. They just hate the rich. They just hate powerful people.
Sure.
They hate people. Like that's really where they're coming from,
It's like envy.
right? It's envy. It's jealousy.
Yeah, yeah, I get
Right.
it. I understand.
Or they feel helpless. They victimize themselves and now they want to project all that onto other people.
Yeah.
Right. You can live a different life. You can try different things. There are many different options. There are more options now than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago.
Sure.
We're richer now than we ever were before.
Sure.
Right. And at that time, at the time the film was made
20 years ago.
20 years ago, there were more options then than there were previously.
Sure.
So
Yeah, yeah.
that's just my opinion.
I think that, like, again, people, like, again, my understanding of mental health and then social things, like, there could be a lot going on there. But yes, there is the freedom in this society to be able to do stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right, next one. Okay. Jarrell and David, do you guys want to do this one? There's two people here.
Sure.
I fancy myself the social lubricator of the dream world, helping people become lucid a little easier. Cut all that fear and anxiety stuff and just rock and roll.
By becoming lucid, you mean just knowing that you're dreaming, right?
Yeah, and then you can control it. They are more realistic and less bizarre than non-lucid dreams.
I just woke up from a dream. It wasn't a typical dream. It seemed more like I walked into an alternate universe or something.
Yeah, it's real. I mean, technically, it's a phenomenon of sleep, but you can have so much damn fun in your dreams. And of course, everyone knows fun rules.
Yeah.
So, what was going on in your dream?
Oh, a lot of people, a lot of talking, just some of it was kind of absurdist.
Mhm.
Like from a strange movie or something. Mostly it was just people going off about whatever really intensely. I woke up wondering, where did all this stuff come from?
You can control that,
Do you have these dreams all the time?
Hell yeah, I'm always going to make the best of it. But the trick is, you got to realize that you're dreaming in the first place. You got to be able to recognize it. You got to be able to ask yourself, hey man, is this a dream? See, most people never ask themselves that when they are awake, or especially when they are asleep. Seems like everyone's sleepwalking through their waking state or walking through their dreams. Either way, they're not going to get much out of it.
The thing that snapped me into realizing I was dreaming was my digital clock. I couldn't really read it. It was like the
Circuitry.
circuitry was all screwed up or something.
Yeah, that's a real common. And the small printed material is pretty tough too, very unstable. Another good tip is trying to adjust light levels. You can't really do that. If you see a light switch nearby, turn it on and off and see if it works. That's one of the few things you can't do in a lucid dream. What the hell? I can fly around, have an interesting conversation with Albert Schweitzer. I can explore all this new dimension of reality. Not to mention I can have any kind of sex I want, which is way cool. So I can't adjust light levels. So what?
But that's like one of the things that you do to test if you're dreaming or not, right?
Yeah, like I said, you can totally train yourself to recognize it. I mean, just hit the light switch every now and then. If the lights are on and you can't turn them off, then most likely you are dreaming. And then you can get down to business. And believe me, it's unlimited. Hey, you know what? You know what I've been working on lately?
What's that?
Oh man, it's a way ambitious, but I'm getting better at it. You're going to dig this. 360 vision. Man, I can see in all directions. Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, man. Well, I gotta go, man.
Okay, later, man. Super profundo on the early eve of the day.
What does that mean?
Well, I've never figured it out. Maybe you can. This guy always whispering in my ear. Louis, he's a reoccurring dream captor.
So yeah, then the character tries to turn the light off and it doesn't turn off. And then it's like the first awareness that he's in his dream state, right?
Mhm.
So this is cool. It's talking about lucid dreaming induction techniques. So one of them is to like as you're awake, you do some little test to say, am I dreaming or am I awake? And the one they give here is light levels, looking at clocks or text. There's other things you can do. You can, before you're sleeping, visualize reoccurring dream information and think about alternative ways to interact with it.
Mm.
You can wake yourself up periodically through the night and then think about dreaming and going back to sleep as long as it's less than like 5 minutes.
Mm.
And then, and then there's while you're awake, you can ask yourself if you're sleeping or dreaming.
Mm.
So this is just to go back to the whole narrative of the film and kind of make some sense of that, and kind of give the viewer. So this one's a bit long, so we're going to save the holy moment for next week. This is chapter 11. We'll probably be able to get through a bunch of stuff depending on how much time I spend talking at the beginning or whatever else. And yeah, so any final thoughts before
I
close it down for
was
today?
also wondering the early point you talk about what is the knowledge,
Mhm.
because I remember you said something like if the knowledge is someone, doesn't matter who do this text, they will always get the same result.
Okay.
Like the science. But as I wonder, like this dream things, like there's different theory about how to analyze a dream.
Okay.
Like the Freudian, like Young,
Yeah.
all this it
Yeah.
is a knowledge because you cannot ask someone to repeat a dream analysis, or get the same thing. There's a lot of things, like even theory of economics, or capitalism, whatever, those are a little bit different than scientific. Those you cannot have someone say, "Hey, try communism," see if they give you the best result.
Yeah.
No, you cannot do that.
Mhm.
So what is really a
To
knowledge?
interpret dreams, so the best theory, one of the best ones, is called the activation synthesis hypothesis. Is that different areas of the brain are being activated during sleep, and in some ways it's also correlated with what's going on in your life. And then it's just your perception of these different areas being activated, and like REM sleep, there's a lot of limbic system stuff, so it'll be less vivid and more feeling based. You'll just have feelings of things that kind of come and go. And then the NREM stage is more like explicit, like there's a narrative and a story and it has some coherence. But there's two predominant modes of dreaming, depending on where you're at in your sleep cycle. I just took a sleep class this summer. So,
Was that the question though? Or was,
And
did you
the
have a
question
different-
is, what is the knowledge?
well, knowledge, okay, but you talked about Freud and then Jung.
Is a Freudian theory the psychoanalysis? Is it a knowledge?
Well, part of it
or
is-
it just a
This is not a question about knowledge, it's a question about theories and how to evaluate the theory. So I'm going to appeal to the Kuhn's critique, his 5 criteria of adequacy. And so the problem with Freud, for example, is he's making a lot of assumptions that aren't proven, right? And we can and he didn't really have data back then. Like we can have like EEG machines like attached to your brain and see the signals of your brain as you're
Yeah,
sleeping.
cocaine though.
Yeah, cocaine. Yeah, and was prescribing it. So-
Sorry, dude.
so
fine.
like a question like whether there's a God or not. That you cannot have a knowledge about it because you cannot say, "Oh, everyone try it and you will get the same result."
Yeah, well,
It's not like that you boil a water.
it's not falsifiable.
Yeah.
And
This is actually from what's the guy's name? Popper.
Popper.
Yeah.
Karl Popper. Yeah.
Karl Popper talk about what is knowledge, what is scientific
Yeah.
knowledge, and what is social knowledge.
Well, he's just saying he's saying that Marxism
Mhm.
and Freudian psychoanalysis are both garbage because they're unfalsifiable.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, yeah,
So any, if so there's this social theories, that is also fit into like unfalsifiable. How do you know?
well, social, yeah, you mean
Yeah.
socialism like Marxism?
Like Marxism, like any of this political theories.
Well, they're not all unfalsifiable. Like sometimes you can test stuff, but maybe it's unethical. Like the Stanford prison experiment. They stopped the experiment because it was crazy, right? So
yeah. There's a movie also about that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Zimbardo.
Yeah, Zimbardo.
Zimbardo was the guy.
How,
He's a
how, how
psychologist.
how many days you can turn? How long you can turn a guy into a?
A guard or whatever. Okay, that's it for today. So we'll see you guys next week, and we will continue with the transcript. We're going to start
We still
with
have 10 left.
chapter 11. Yeah, I know. They get smaller though.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
okay. Do it once, do it right. Do it correctly this
That's
time.
Are
correct.
you still planning
Agreed.
to finish the rest of it in one session or two?
It might take two.
Yeah.
I also talked for 45 minutes about other stuff at the beginning, right? So
I'll
but it's
take
fine.
two sessions, but
Whatever.
I love it, man.
Yeah.
I love it.
All right, guys. We'll see you later.